the late 90s, early 2000s, there were the Deen Intensive programs and the Rahla program in North America. And that became my first exposure to the study of sacred knowledge locally in the United States and then going abroad for short periods of time. One of the challenges that many people had is you didn't have resources locally. And so these became, for many of us, the only opportunities that we would have to sit with scholars and to have periods of intense study. Sometimes local resources were either not available or spread too thin. And so that became something that became gradually over time a larger and larger part of my life. And others had the ability to go for extended periods of time, while some of us, including myself, would have to settle for short stints of time frequently and maybe more long distance educational opportunities. I think all resulting from a mismatch between local demand and local scholarship. I think some of the challenges that students of knowledge face is having access to teachers. That's one major challenge that's there, whether locally or online. Now we have different ways of accessing teachers. The other is having the space carved out for them. So either whether it's time or the finances, these are all challenges and barriers to people accessing knowledge and pursuing knowledge in a more serious way. So for the Muslim community, even historically, whenever they travel to new lands, scholars were at the center of that. No Muslims would ever enter new lands without having a faqih or a scholar there to help stabilize the community, educate that community, and ensure that Islamic civilization became a center point for that community. So scholars for us are the starting point for the development of any community or civilization. So for me, I think that one of the challenges that we face in the West is that hasn't always happened. Our communities tended to develop because of migration for other reasons, economic reasons, and scholarship became a bit of an afterthought, often leading to confusion, crises in leadership, and really, I think, perhaps understandings of the religion that may not be consonant with our tradition and with our truly Islamic values. And so I think that with scholars at the center of the community, when they're well supported, when they have the space that they need in order to direct the community, you'll have a much more coherent vision of what Muslims should be doing here in the West. Most of our scholars are overworked and underpaid. That's a cliche, but it's true. Most scholars are serving so many different capacities because they don't have the support of the community, they don't have support staff around them, they don't have the financial support. They're often giving khutbah, they're often teaching classes, they're often mentoring youth, they're often, burying our dead and marrying our young. They're really wearing far too many hats to be able to focus on the things that only they can do well. And some of that is changing, alhamdulillah. As the years have gone on, we've sent more people to learn, and we do have some support, but I think we are still struggling in many areas to provide them with the support to really be able to build for the long term. Historically, Muslim scholars were seen as such an important part of the community that awqaf were established to make sure they never had to worry about finances. You don't want a scholar ever worrying about where their money is going to come from. Instability is very dangerous, I think, for scholars. If you think about even what we do in Western universities, we tenure professors, and that allows them to feel that sense of stability. They can focus. One, it allows them the freedom of thought and expression, but it also allows them to really focus on their work in ways that they can gain a depth to their research, to their writing, to their study, to their development. Early on in their careers, they're working to establish themselves, but there's an inherent value in our scholars knowing that they don't have to worry about being taken care of. They can really focus on what's best for the community. So I think within one community, if there are a large number of scholars, what ends up happening is scholars are able to specialize, they're able to have areas that they specialize in, whether that's academically or whether that is through the institutions that they're at. So for example, someone might be more interested in developing serious and advanced students of knowledge. So they might teach in an institution long-term. Others might prefer local programming and make sure that the youth know their fard ayn, the knowledge that's incumbent upon every Muslim to know. Others might have other areas of interest, but when we don't have an adequate number of scholars, what ends up happening is we water down what scholars are able to do because they tend to do too much. And so instead of having scholars that specialize in hadith or in fiqh or usul, they have to maintain a baseline knowledge in all areas and teach at a very basic level in all areas because there's no one else to do those things. So the community would be able to access scholars in a different way. They'd have scholars that are able to train young people to play certain roles in the community. Then you would have scholars that could give time and access to people in ways that they can't when they're spread thin. So it's similar to asking, how does a community benefit from having a large number of doctors? Their health care will just be better. Access to get appointments and to see a doctor will improve. Preventable diseases will improve. So these are analogies for us to consider what happens when we as a community get access to our scholars more frequently and more easily, and they're more supported throughout that time. So when there aren't enough scholars to address the needs of a community, a gap arises between the community's needs and what scholars are able to provide. And what ends up happening, and has happened historically, is the community tries to find its way on its own. And in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So that is a challenge that we've had as a community. And so the lack of scholars forces a community to pursue things without perhaps the right guidelines, the right knowledge. Things will start to go out of the boundaries. People will start to lose the very tradition that we're working to preserve, and they'll do it in the name of Islam as well. Oftentimes we tend to have the perspective, unfortunately as a community, that things that are done for the sake of Allah should not be compensated adequately. They don't need the professionalism around it. If you look at people in their professional lives, they do everything on time, they do everything with a great deal of ihsan and itqan and great excellence, and we, as a community, we tend to excel professionally, but when we come to the masjid, we can't even park properly, we can't even, and that extends, that mentality really extends into how we view our scholars. We tend to see them as people who should be doing this without compensation, without the proper support around them. And so I think even if a scholar declines adequate compensation and says that this is something that they're willing to do, if they have other means of supporting themselves, it shows what we value as a community, that we establish for ourselves, and we declare this is so valuable to us, this is what we would like to offer someone. So whether it's in a masjid or in an educational institution, I think it's very important to show that these are the most prized people in our community, the most honored. They are the inheritors of the prophets, and so because of that, they should be honored adequately as well. Imam Shafi'i has a famous poem about seeking knowledge. He says, أخي لن تنال العلم إلا بستة سأنبك عن تفصيلها ببياني. That, my dear brother, you cannot attain knowledge except by way of having 6 things, and I will delineate them clearly for you. These are realities that without which a person cannot have. Dhaka'un, you have to have some degree of intelligence. That is up to the student. We as a community, we can't give them that if they don't have that. But then hirs, that there has to be drive. So some people are very intelligent, but they're lazy. They don't have that drive. They're not motivated to attain these things. Ijtihad, they have to work hard at this. Those are all on the student. If they have that, beautiful. But then he says, وَبُلْغَ, that they have to have the means to do that. Many students of knowledge in the past are great imams. They benefited from awqaf. They were supported by others. They knew that if they had the ability, if they had the intelligence, if they had the drive, and if they were hardworking, the rest would be provided for them as long as they could prove themselves. So this bulgha is a very important. And then وَصُحْبَةُ أُسْتَاذٍ, to have the company of a qualified teacher. So you can have somebody who has all the drive in the world, even if they come from a place of means. If they are not granted the opportunity to come together with a qualified teacher, they won't be able to attain knowledge. وَطُولُ زَمَانِ, and a lot of time. It takes time. You can't have that time carved out for you without some sort of external support. And there are people, alhamdulillah, they come from a family of means and they support them through extended periods of time where they're seeking knowledge. But I mean, we do this in our secular world. People go to college or they go to law school or medical school, they get loans. The governments help them, they give them grants. They know that you cannot earn an income and pay for this at the same time. Unfortunately, they tend to be overburdened by debt when they're done. But they recognize that we as a society need these people. We need doctors and lawyers and engineers for society. But we also need imams, and we need scholars, and we need da'is, and we need guides, and we need teachers for the youth, and we need people who understand the religion, but they need our support. They need to be enabled to pursue the knowledge that they pursue. And then when they come back, they can work out arrangements with their communities in which they, pay back their debt to them in different ways by having a commitment where they teach and remain there locally. But we should invest in our youth the same way that we do in other fields. We should do the same in the sacred sciences.
Yeah.
Well, a waqf would provide us not just with the means to support students and scholars in many ways, but it would also grant us the longevity to do so in a way that really transforms a community. If somebody, if you give a man a fish, he eats for the day, but you teach him how to fish, he eats forever. That kind of long-term perspective on the community, that's why all of the Muslim civilizations, they had awqaf. They had awqaf for many things, not just seeking knowledge, but they saw that there needs to be some perpetuity to this, and to establish something that has a stability and that can keep generation after generation, keep providing that kind of support, I think is critical. And this is something that all of our communities should be doing, is establishing and supporting awqaf and having that kind of long-term vision that enables us to build the kinds of institutions that only can be built with that kind of money. You can only get so far on the monthly donation aspect, but to really build great institutions, it requires a different caliber of financial support. As communities, if we take a step back, if we imagine that we lived in a remote area and people were getting sick, and we didn't have access to health care, what would we do as a community? We'd probably put our heads together and say, we need to send somebody from our remote region to the city or to the capital so they can go to medical school. Then we'd have a doctor. That would be great. But then we would say, well, it's one doctor and we're a large community. What are we going to do now? And so I think that is an analogy of how we are as a community in terms of our scholarship and education, and spiritually as well. And so I think establishing that need as a community, identifying and coming to real terms with the fact that we do have this gap between what our needs are and what we're able to provide the community. And so we're going to invest in people and the human resources to come back and to serve the community, but then constantly reassess. Do we have enough support for them? Are there enough? How do we get the next generation who's going to apprentice under the senior scholars, and how do they support them and serve them, etc., and extend out that way? The problem with us is I think we think that religion can be taught in in someone's pastime. It can be taught part-time in between somebody earning a living. Religion just happens in the off hours. But we need to be far more deliberative about this. You know, if we're deliberate, we can start to have the kind of long-term planning where we can transform our communities. We would do it for our physical health, we would do it for other needs, we'd be able to identify it far more easily. But I think we've borrowed from some of the Muslim world a culture and attitude about teachers and scholars. They tend to be people who are less educated than the people of, you know, doctors and lawyers and engineers, and so there's this kind of, they'll figure it out, it just happens, they're always there, they're easy to find and they're easy to replace. When I think we should look a little farther back to when the Muslim civilizations were at their peak. How did they honor and value and treat their scholars, and see that correlation? And so the more that we honored scholars and education, the more we flourished. And when we started to value it less and less and value the secular sciences, for lack of a better term, then we saw what happened after that.